All right, thanks, Alan. And thank you, everybody, for attending. Let's get this started. There we go. Before we get started into the webinar content, I want to do a really quick introduction to Tejas. I promise it won't take long, just in case you don't know who we are. So Tejas Networks is actually the #1 telecom equipment provider in India. We have our headquarters in Bangalore, and we also have America's headquarters in both Dallas, Texas, and Mexico City. We have customers in over 75 countries and over 500,000 network elements deployed. So we've been very prolific. And we have more than 12,000 network elements in the Americas. We have a broad range of services and technologies, but today I'm focused on Ethernet and wholesale services, as you saw from the title. And tomorrow, Alan has a webinar at the same time on our WDM and OTN switching products. So focused on wholesale WDM services. Our products range from ultra-converged broadband, so we do things like PON in the access network, to enterprise services, to data center switches and routers. So a very broad portfolio of products. Our manager is multi-layered. It manages everything from layer 0 to layer 3, since we have those technologies in our products. Which gives us a single unified way to present our products to our customers. It makes operations much simpler across all the products. And of course, we can do some level of correlation between the layers. We have a technology called software-defined hardware. And it's basically the prolific use of FPGAs or programmable chips. And we use it for a couple of things. Number one is to reduce the cost of the platform. So we often combine the functions that we would normally have to buy multiple chips for onto a single, less expensive chip. And we also use it to extend the life of the product. So because these devices are programmable, we can actually update them in the field. So there are new O&M features or protocols that need to be supported. We'll often do it with a field upgrade where it would have required a hardware swap with other vendors. Our devices are future ready in that we designed them to span multiple generations. To give you an example, the Ethernet switching platform that I'm talking about today started with 64 gig, and then we introduced 100 gig, then a 200 gig, 300 gig, terabit, and all in the same set of chassis. So we try to keep the same product chassis alive and continuously upgrade them to new technologies. All right. There we go. All right. So let's move on to the webinar content. So what we're going to talk about today is, first I'll start with talking about the state of the network due to COVID. Now you all know what's going on with COVID, so I'm going to talk about it in relation to premium enterprise and wholesale services and what types of service opportunities I think it'll drive for you. Then I'll talk about service and network architectures to reduce the cost of delivering these premium SLAs. And then I'll do a quick overview on the products that we offer that can help you out as well. So let's start with COVID. So all the things that are going on with COVID, you're living with, so you're familiar with them. But let's take some of those things and look at how they're going to affect how we do business in the future. So things like remote networking and remote education and video conferencing from home, all of those things, of course, in the near term are driving bandwidth in the access network. But what we think is going to happen is a lot of things that we're doing now are going to carry over post-COVID. So essentially, if people are doing much more video conferencing than they were doing pre-COVID, they're probably doing that instead of traveling. They're probably saving a lot of money. Virtualized events, I think, will become more popular. If vendors like ourselves think they were successful during COVID, we'll continue to do them after COVID as well. So you'll see a lot more of the things done in the digital domain than were done pre-COVID. And by the way, once people go back to work, that higher bandwidth demand that we're seeing in homes today will move then to the businesses where they worked. So they'll take that bandwidth demand with them. And so there are other things that are already driving demand outside of the home. So first of all, things like telemedicine. So every clinic and hospital now that's providing telemedicine services now needs more capacity. And maybe even premium capacity, where they didn't demand it in the past. Remote education I already talked about, but that not only drives bandwidth in the home, but it drives bandwidth in the cloud or bandwidth at educational institutions and government institutions. For manufacturing, people working from home, now manufacturing plants are trying to accommodate that, so they're bringing in more IoT, so they can monitor things remotely and maybe even virtual reality and augmented reality so that they can do things from home that they would have normally had to go into the office to do. And leisure. We did this, we of course did leisure things like video games and streaming video and stuff like that pre-COVID. But what's important post-COVID is that now people are getting used to doing more of that as their sources of entertainment shut down, like sports and mini golf and theaters and things like that. They found ways to entertain themselves digitally, and they'll get locked into games, get locked into streaming services, and so that demand will continue to go up. So the demand that has pushed toward the homes right now will push to all sorts of businesses. And what's going to happen as a result of that is those businesses now that may not have required premium SLAs or premium services will now be looking for those. And I'll talk about the different types of premium services and why. So really quickly, I looked at the effects of COVID on equipment purchases. I thought, okay, so everything's moving to the home now, so broadband equipment must be flying in terms of sales. And I looked at the OVM numbers before and after. And what we saw was actually broadband equipment sales have actually gone down in 2020. And what they said is that's primarily because of the lockdown. But what they're forecasting is that's going to continue to grow after COVID. So the demand's going to be higher. And the reason they're saying that is that the connections that are getting deployed are much higher rate connections. So they're already seeing in equipment purchases what I'm saying is going to happen. Basically, people are looking for higher rate services coming to their homes now, and eventually that'll be businesses as well. And they'll continue to deploy those post-COVID, which will cause that equipment purchasing to rise in future years as well. So some COVID fun facts. AT&T said 6 months in that their traffic on their network had increased 20%. And they said their upstream traffic had increased 60%, which was interesting. And the reason for that is now people used to be just streaming stuff into their homes and things like that, right? But now they're doing things like video conferencing, which requires symmetric bandwidth. And in the past, they did more downloading than they did uploading, but now it's becoming more symmetric, and that's going to drive business and network architectures for you guys as well. So, and this is a quick thing. I just looked at some websites in Mexico City and increases in traffic. So, Live.com, the Microsoft site has increased by 65%, and that makes sense for work at home. Walmart, so shopping, now that people aren't going to stores, they're doing all the shopping online. So you see Walmart and Amazon. Their traffic has boosted 63 and 14%, and even Google for searches 19%. And one other fun fact is that even in all of this, what they're saying is that gaming and social media basically make up 80% of all internet traffic. So now you know what your kids are doing while you're working hard on your video conferencing, and you know why your connection is slowing down constantly. All right, so what does this mean in terms of us, you guys? What do you have to do in your networks? Of course, there's rapid addition and upgrade of broadband connections. So we saw that in the numbers that I showed you just a few minutes ago. I focused on that in yesterday's webinar. So in today's webinar, I'm going to focus on delivering and measuring superior SLA in small offices and home offices for mission critical users and services. So what I mean by that is, okay, so now small businesses and things that just buy internet connections and don't have really demanding SLA requirements will probably start having demanding SLA requirements. And in fact, even people that are doing their home offices will also start having more demanding SLA requirements. And in fact, my provider tells me I get 200 megabits. I know for sure I don't get 200 megabits. And only now I've started complaining to them because I'm working from home a whole lot. And anyways, and then of course scaling your network end to end. That's a whole different topic. We'll talk about that at another time. So as you add these premium Ethernet services, that means you need more backhaul and more capacity and those types of things. All right, so what am I talking about when I'm talking about premium enterprise and wholesale services? We're talking about basically services that you more or less offer today, but maybe stepping them up a little bit in terms of the types of SLAs that customers will be looking for. And these, by the way, are service opportunities. As customers transition the type of services they're looking at, those are service opportunities for you, because generally you can upsell those types of services. So one type of service that I'll talk a little bit about today is maybe Ethernet services, but delivering them over OTN. And that's done for a couple of reasons. One is for latency, and the other one I'll talk about in the future. But basically over OTN, if you deliver Ethernet over OTN, you can beat the latency than any switched or routed network. So you see those primarily for financial enterprises, but as people get more demanding on their SLAs, you may see that in standard businesses like hospitals and things that have critical information they need to transport, and they want things to move quickly. Native Ethernet, of course, will still be around, but as I mentioned on the previous slide, maybe small businesses and things that didn't have demanding SLA requirements will step up their game and ask you for more demanding SLA requirements, and I'll talk about what that means in just a few minutes. Ethernet over GPON I focused on yesterday, but the one thing I wanted to point out here is, remember I said that bandwidth is getting more symmetric. So GPON is asymmetric. It has much more downstream bandwidth than upstream. So we're going to see, I think, a push to move from GPON to symmetric technologies like XGS-PON. And I think it'll move faster than it did pre-COVID. We already saw some of that pre-COVID, but now I think it will step up, because that also increases the amount of bandwidth they can deliver to the small businesses and homes. In backhaul, like wireless backhaul, we've always had pretty demanding SLAs. So, but it may start to change a little. In fact, it already has. So, as what people generally look for with backhaul would be, for instance, bandwidth guarantees and latency guarantees, right? So, but now what's happening is the wireless carriers like Verizon just introduced a home 5G service, right, where they'll actually deliver wireless service to compete for some of that new broadband business to the homes. And to do that, they're having to roll out lots and lots of 5G small cells. And so as they do that, they're probably going to start demanding also timing and synchronization on the network, because small cells, unlike macro cells, don't always have access to GPS for timing and sync. So they're now expecting to get that over the network, and we're seeing a lot of that. And then finally, legacy services. Believe it or not, still a lot of that stuff around here. We get requests for circuit emulated legacy services all the time. I think the move to Ethernet will accelerate as those people need more bandwidth than the legacy service can provide. And when they move, they're going to demand the types of SLAs they saw at layer 1, with SONET and SDH. So they're going to want very good availability statistics, and they're also going to want guarantees on bandwidth as well. And those that don't move, I think carriers will start to accelerate moving that bandwidth onto their Ethernet network as they add new Ethernet devices to accommodate the new capacity. They'll want to move their legacy services over to those new Ethernet devices as well with circuit emulation. All right. So SLA parameters, what are people looking for? So the bandwidth and costs they've been looking for years, so nothing new there, right? Nothing to see here. So, but people are going to be looking for more bandwidth, which I explained on the other, and unfortunately, they're going to be looking for less cost. So we'll talk a little bit about reducing cost as well, but hopefully you can offset by offering more premium services with higher bandwidth. So you can offset some of that cost with delta revenues from premium services. As I mentioned, people are going to want those services to scale. I think people will upgrade their services more often post-COVID as they realize they need more and more. And the good news is Carrier Ethernet, which many of us use to deliver these types of services, scales really well in service. So you can scale the size of a Carrier Ethernet connection in service without taking the service down. Timing and sync. I talked about on the previous slide, but basically what people will be looking for there is sync E and 1588 timing. Protection. So first, I think places where they didn't normally demand protection, maybe small businesses and home offices, they may start demanding that as they demand better availability in those areas. And I think there might be an opportunity also to upsell to provide different levels of protection. So maybe just 1+1 type protection, or shared protection, or multi-layered protection, right, where you're protecting multiple times and guaranteeing certain uptimes based on that. Security, maybe more of a need for encryption as people do more digitally with their critical data that they want to protect. Latency, I already talked about on the previous slide. And availability, I already talked about as well. So, all right. So how do we deliver these services? So I'm going to focus today on Carrier Ethernet. And for a number of reasons, we think Carrier Ethernet is a nice cost-effective way. Remember, cost is being compressed. And it's a very cost-effective way to deliver all the types of services and SLAs that I talked about on the previous screens. Many of you are already doing it today. And the good news is there's probably a lot of unused capability that you have that you probably haven't taken advantage of because today maybe your SLAs are a little simpler. They're just based on bandwidth guarantees, maybe protection, and uptime or something like that, right? So they're generally very simple. There are two technologies, and I'll talk a little bit more about each of these, Q&Q and MPLS-TP, that we're using. Some of you probably using one, some of the other. And the good news is both of those technologies are fine for everything I talked about on the previous slide. So from the standpoint of offering those SLAs and those bandwidth guarantees and those availability guarantees, it doesn't really matter which technology you use, but there are reasons that people use one over the other. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. But you can provide committed bandwidth, as you know, and excess bandwidth. So you can provide bandwidth commitments. You can do dynamic resizing. MPLS-TP has traffic engineering built in, but even Q&Q, you can engineer your resources, essentially, and make sure you don't oversubscribe your bandwidth. So you can subscribe certain quality of service, and vendors like ourselves offer access control to help you basically manage your resources. So technologies are great, lower than doing, say, layer 3 VPN or something like that in cost and ongoing cost because they use less power and operationally they cost less over time. And then I mentioned OTN on the previous slide, and I want to mention it again because OTN is also good to have in your portfolio just so you can offer those low latency services. Now you can offer low latency services over Carrier Ethernet, just not as low latency. So, and I think people are going to get pickier and pickier about how low latency they want, all right? And also, if you can deliver the Ethernet service, if you don't need any switching aggregation or routing, then it's actually a much cheaper way to deliver it. If it's just a wholesale service, essentially, then much, much cheaper to deliver it that way. Comprehensive security, you can do layer 1 encryption. Comprehensive SLAs, everybody knows how good the SLAs are on TDM type circuits for availability, and OTN provides all of that. So let's look at Ethernet versus MPLS-TP very quickly. So Q&Q, of course, provides customer tunneling. We use VLANs to tunnel people's stuff through our network. So you can provide these types of services using tunneling. You can do resource management through bandwidth profiles where you specify the amount of bandwidth, and then through access control, we make sure that you don't oversubscribe that bandwidth on your network. You can provide sub 50 millisecond protection through rings and link protection. And you can provide multi-layered protection using both link protection and rings as well. So I won't talk about those. Most of you are familiar with those. I'll talk about some more interesting protection schemes a little later. And of course, Ethernet is, it's well-baked. It's got very comprehensive fault monitoring. Guys like ourselves love it because it provisions like a circuit, right? And it kind of interops with MPLS. You can do an Ethernet handoff. So, and then take it into the MPLS domain. So people like it for all those reasons, right? So MPLS-TP, a lot of people view that as kind of the future. A lot of people, especially in North America, started using Q&Q and view MPLS-TP as more scalable technology that they can utilize. And there's some reasons for that. So number one is you don't have the VLAN limitation. You're no longer using VLANs to carry things. You're using label switch paths and just basically Ethernet pipes that are traffic engineered through the MPLS network. Or through the MPLS-TP network. It works just like MPLS, which incidentally is the other thing people like about the protocol is it literally does work just like MPLS, except it doesn't have visibility of layer 3. And it actually really interops with MPLS. You can take a pseudo wire through an MPLS network and an MPLS-TP network with no problems. And with MPLS-TP, you do have 50 millisecond protection. You do have multi-layered protection. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And all the nice things that you got with Ethernet. It looks like a pipe. comprehensive fault management, etc. So with both of these technologies, you can, number one, produce a better cost than delivering them, say, with layer 3. You get scalability, as I talked about before. You can deliver timing and sync SLAs. They provide 1588 and SYNC-E for doing that. There are multiple types of protection. I'll touch on that a little later. You can provide security, either encrypt at layer 1 or even at layer 2 if you want to with some systems. And then you can actually deliver low latency services, maybe not as low as an OTN service, but we provide tools to allow you to deliver them. And if you've done wireless backhaul, you've used them. So you can use like 2544 to see what kind of latency you're getting through your network. And then ultimately you can guarantee SLAs once you figure out, okay, this is the latency I can guarantee. Then you use Y1731 to measure it continuously and report to your customers. So you can offer low latency SLAs, just not as low latency as OTN. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is just briefly again talk about OTN. We talked about some of the values. I've already talked about cost savings, power savings, but another common way of using OTN is for reducing the cost of using routers in your network. So basically, if you're already using routers, if you're delivering your services with routers and maybe you've got a ring, and you're running a bunch of 10 gigs around them, you probably, because of your fiber topology, you have to run them through all of the routers. So you're eating up router capacity on each one. And these are just gray optics that you're running off of it. If you pop in OTN, you can basically, so say you take all those 10 gigs, you send them to the OTN layer, and then you can groom them up over 100 gig and bypass the routers where you don't need to provide capacity between any two router pairs. So you can actually conserve router ports, you can conserve fiber. Now you could have aggregated things up to 100 gig at the router layer, but that would be much more expensive, much more operationally costly because it eats up more power as well. And then once you have that OTN layer in there, you can actually bypass that router in some cases to deliver low latency services, more predictable low latency, because routers, it's difficult to deliver low latency through routers because router latency is dependent on things like utilization. And so it's very hard to do it. And it allows you to pick up other service types like fiber channel and things like that in that layer. And it gives you access to layer 1 encryption, which is more secure than any packet layer encryption, because at every layer you go up the stack and encrypt, you're not encrypting something like the IP addresses or the MAC addresses. But if you encrypt at layer 1, all that packet stuff gets encrypted, right? So it's that's why a lot of military establishments and government establishments look for it. All right. And by the way, you can do router bypass and that kind of thing even with carrier Ethernet. In fact, you could get rid of the routers altogether if you're not delivering an actual layer 3 service and deliver directly with carrier Ethernet. It will also be lower in cost, lower in power, and it will allow you to deliver a lower latency service than a router, but maybe not as low as OTN. All right. So enhanced quality of service, as I mentioned, businesses that weren't requiring quality of service are going to start asking you for it. And you're probably going to have to get more creative with what you offer. And the good news is based on at least most of the deployments I've seen, the capabilities of carrier Ethernet are far beyond what most carriers actually offer in terms of quality of service. So all of you offer something equivalent to maybe a gold, a silver, and a bronze service. Maybe a gold being it's high priority, it's a certain amount of bandwidth, and I don't drop packets. Maybe silver is I'm a certain priority, I do drop packets, but not a lot. And maybe a bronze being best effort, right? Whatever I can get, whatever's left over after these other two guys eat it up, right? So you generally offer SLAs today based on bandwidth guarantees and a certain quality, essentially. So now the good news is as our users get more sophisticated and we need to do more sophisticated things, carrier Ethernet has a lot of that built in. And even if the things they want to do are based on layer 3. So to give you a couple of examples, say for instance at this hospital, basically they've decided that all the patient data, high resolution scans and things like that they transfer from hospital to hospital, have become higher priority. And since their internet traffic is picked up, they no longer have room for that. So they want to separate that out into one pipe and then they put the internet traffic on a separate pipe so it doesn't interfere with that critical data as they send it to patients' records around from hospital to hospital. So what you could do for your service is, even with carrier Ethernet, most carrier Ethernet systems today, is you could base the service quality that you give them on, say, the IP address it comes from. Right, so if they're pumping the patient data on one port on a router and the internet data on another port, you can look at the IP address and say, okay, give the patient data a certain quality, give the internet data a certain quality. You can even say give them the quality through my network on this service that they have at layer 3. So you can look at the layer 3 priority, the DSCP. And you can say, okay, I'm going to base the priority that you're giving your traffic in your network at layer 3. I'm going to base the priority that I give you through my network on that, right? So there's tons more, but it would take just a long time to explain. So I'm going to have to move on. And but if you come, you can ask more detailed questions if you come to our virtual booth after this. We got plenty of time to elaborate more if there's anything you see you want us to talk about more. So another thing, so reducing costs. So one of the things that's always been a pet peeve of mine is that we get carriers that come to us and they'll do an RFP, say, for just PON, or an RFP for just carrier Ethernet services and not PON, or an RFP for just circuit emulation, right? And so they're buying separate boxes for those things, which confuses me because they're all basically just Ethernet services. And the more you put into a single box, the more money you save, right? So for obvious reasons, right? Not a lot of metal to buy, but also things like the fabric, which are the most expensive piece, they don't scale linearly. So if you buy 4 fabrics of 10 gig a piece and versus buying 1 fabric of 40, you're probably paying like 30% more if you bought one. And the other thing is the more you integrate these products, the better and more efficiently your backhaul can be. So if you're doing wholesale backhaul, maybe you use one wholesale pipe or a smaller wholesale pipe and pay less for it. If you're backhauling over WDM, maybe you use fewer wavelengths, right? So you can save a tremendous amount of money by combining applications off of a single platform. Many of us offer a single platform that do all of those things. And you can also save from a network architectural standpoint as well. All right, so protection, I had mentioned that, of course, if you use Q&Q for carrier Ethernet services, you all know, you have rings. I'm not showing a ring here, but this could be a completed ring all the way around. And then you generally put nodes on a ring, right? So, but there are some more advanced capabilities offered even with Q&Q. And I'm just going to show one of them now. Well, first of all, you can do multi-tiered protection. You can generally provision a ring over link ag groups so that every link is protected individually, and then the ring is protected over that. And the ring doesn't protect until the link ag group completely fails, right? So then you get multi-tiered protection. But another interesting thing we use to provide another level of redundancy is we allow you to do an open ring. So basically, we virtually connect the ring in our system. And we allow you not to have to connect it physically. So you can put all your stuff on a ring in your access network. And then say, for instance, that'll let you do things like offer internet connections through 2 different service providers, right? Or, or just offer connections to do 2 different cloud services, right? Separate connections, right? For redundancy and things like that. So it gives you a lot of interesting things that you can do. And it works like a ring. So initially your traffic goes over one path. If that path fails, then it goes over the other path. Whoop, my cute animation didn't go. But it goes over the other path. And the good news is it's still 50-second protection. And by the way, that protection is done independent of what's going on in the carrier network. So you don't need control of these routers, for instance, to set your ring up against these routers, basically. All right, so with MPLS-TP, you can also do multi-tiered protection. For those of you who aren't familiar with MPLS-TP, generally you set up LSPs, just like MPLS, so line switch, label switch paths, which are just Ethernet pipes, and you can set them up protected. They do 1+1 protection, so you have a working and a protect up top. And then you run a pseudo wire over it to carry the traffic, and so the pseudo wire will run over the working. If the working breaks, it runs over the protect. So what you can also do is you can also protect the pseudo wire over multiple protected LSP groups. So you can set up an LSP group B, which is also protected, and then you can protect the pseudowire over both those groups. So if the protect path in group A also dies, then the pseudowire protects over group B. And it has yet another failover it can do after that, right? Because when that working in group B fails, it can go to the protection path on group B. All right, so lots of neat, interesting things you can do that will hopefully help you address some of the premium services that people will be looking for. So really quickly, I want to hit on our products and what we offer to deliver, all of the services and SLAs and things like that I talked about. I mentioned OTN, and we do have separate OTN switching and DWDM platforms, or integrated OTN switching and DWDM platforms, both for Metro and Core. And the focus of the webinar tomorrow will be premium WDM services, and Alan will probably talk about those a little more. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about our Ethernet switching platform, which is also our ultra-converged broadband platform, which offers PON, GPON, XGS-PON, and NG-PON2 in the future. It offers carrier Ethernet, both MPLS-TP and Q&Q. And so all the SLAs and all the requirements that I showed you for timing and sync and everything on the previous slides can be provided by these platforms. And we also allow you to pick up legacy services through circuit emulation. The product is actually a family of products, and we offer both chassis and pizza boxes, so you can right size for whatever your application is. So all of these chassis offer all of the services that I talked about before, and you can just plug in various cards for circuit emulation, or for packet, or for PON, and they all share the same aggregation switch, right? So that integrates that expensive switching cost and gets it all into one platform for all of those service types. They're fully front access. Everything is pluggable. We don't distinguish between uni and NNI ports. So basically, you can use as many of the ports for backhaul as you want, as many of the ports customer facing as you want. All of these chassis offer fully redundant processors, fabrics, and fans. We also allow you to plug in multiple different switch sizes in all these chassis. So a lot of vendors have a specific switch size for each chassis, but like this small chassis, this 2RU7 slot, we've got a 64 gigs switch fabric, we've got a 100 gig switch fabric, we've got a 200 gig switch fabric. We're introducing a 300 gig so that you can optimize around whatever capacity you need to run those applications off of that device. And by the way, if you only run one application, you need a smaller switch, we got one for you. All right, and if you want even less, more cost effective, we have some specialized pizza boxes that will do only carrier Ethernet, or a mix of carrier Ethernet and circuit emulation, or only PON, right? So we've got various different offerings. The nodes themselves have easy to use graphical user interfaces, so it's very easy to provision even at the node level, but we take a lot of pride in our manager, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes. And these devices, very field proven. There's tens of thousands of them out there already today. All right, so they're already deployed. It's not a new thing. And I just wanted to point out with this system, as I did before, all the things that I talked about before, like Y1731 for delivering low latency services, 1588 for timing, Sync-E for timing, all the things for those specialized types of services we provide. And you can use our OTN layer as well to deliver the OTN services. And all the applications that I talked about when I talked about where premium services will be, we support. So enterprise services, wholesale services, wireless backhaul, triple play, legacy migration. All right, and we can backhaul either over gray optics or over WDM. You can plug WDM optics directly into this chassis. All right, and then finally, our manager. Not going to spend a lot of time, and in the virtual booth, Alan can actually demo the manager. So if you want to see it as well, we take a lot of pride into it. We put a lot of our investment into this. As I said, we manage everything from it. We try to make every different type of thing look alike. So when you're provisioning the service over MPLS-TP or Q&Q, it looks almost identical. There's some subtle differences like in protection and stuff like that, but we try to make it look as much alike as we can, so it makes it easy for you to transition to new technologies. We do auto provisioning and auto routing, and we let you set your own rules on auto routing, like restricting certain chassis and links and things like that. So it's very sophisticated. If you want to see more, come to our virtual booth afterwards. And of course, it has all the standard FCAPS capabilities, configuration management, security management. Oh, and the one other thing, two other things I wanted to mention is we use wizards and templates everywhere. So if you're doing something over and over, you can set up a template and just use that template. And we have very extensive quality of service and SLA reporting for all different sorts of different parameters at all sorts of different layers, from layer 1 all the way up to layer 3. And we let you export those reports in PDF or spreadsheets, etc. All right. So in summary, key takeaway. So enterprise connectivity services are growing, and post-COVID, we believe that there will be a much higher demand for premium services that offer all the premium capabilities that I talked about before, and in enterprises that didn't demand those things before because they're doing more mission-critical stuff from their offices once they get back into their offices. So great opportunity for you guys. We believe you'll see more demand for premium service where they haven't been before, as I said before, but we believe carrier Ethernet plays a major role in that just because you can use it to deliver them more cost effectively because there will be pricing pressure. And Tejas, we have a very innovative end-to-end portfolio, which we'd love to show you in our virtual booth. We provide really dense integration of functionality to help you reduce cost in your network.